Well, those surges we've seen across the country in terms of virus case counts have really hit the restaurants hard. A lot of these restaurants were just recovering over in the summer, coming back from the worst of the pandemic, at least in the spring. Now they're faced with additional restrictions. Indoor dining canceled in places like New York, outdoor dining canceled in places like California. The National Restaurant Association saying that more than 110,000 restaurants nationally have already closed permanently or long term. And as we count down to the end of this year, we are revisiting some of the businesses, restaurant owners that we have been able to sit down with throughout this pandemic. Many of them were faced with a lot of uncertainty in the early days of the pandemic, now looking at an uphill climb here going into 2021. Let's bring in Paul Ryan and Pat Ryan. They are restaurant owners in Pennsylvania. And Paul and Pat, I still remember when we had that conversation early May, there was still a lot of uncertainty here about how you would be able to bounce back. You had gotten the PPP loans to be able to keep running some of your restaurants there. How are things shaping up right now as you count down to the last days of 2020, especially with this most recent surge bringing in additional restrictions in place for restaurants?
Go ahead, Pat. You want to start?
Well, thanks for having us on again today, and happy holidays, everyone. It's been challenging and frustrating to go through this process, and there seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination. But right now, with two of our places in Philadelphia are completely shut down because there's no indoor, when we don't have the facilities to do outside, and it's just too cold to sit outside. In Westchester and Phoenixville, we are trying to do some business, but to tell you the truth, it's not very good at all, and it's got to be over soon, hopefully.
And Paul, I know when we talked, you talked about just how this was a family-run business. You've sort of been able to survive even the Spanish flu you mentioned in the early days of the business. And how have you had to kind of pivot the way you run your operations? You've had the takeout in place for now, but I imagine you've got restaurants in some college towns, and those students never really came back because of the virus still in place.
Well, it could go. I mean, it has been a roller coaster ride because we started out in these different phases. We were able to survive with outdoor dining and 50% inside dining, but then they restricted the hours that you could be open from 2 o'clock back to 11 o'clock, which hurt a lot. And then we got through all the summer weeks pretty well. And then the students were supposed to come back in September, and University of Penn canceled classes, although a lot of the students did come back and stay in their apartments. Now, when we went to 50% indoor dining, we had students in the place, and quite frankly, it was like herding cats. They don't listen, they don't socially distance, they don't seem to be affected by this as much as the elderly population. So that's hard to control the students. Right now, we're looking at the University of Penn coming back second semester with all their students on campus. We'll see if that changes, if this new surge comes in the next couple of weeks. As of right now, Philadelphia is shut down for all indoor dining until January 15th.
And Pat, just thinking about bar culture and the future of bar culture, I miss it. I yearn for it. I can't wait to get drinks with friends. I know you do too. How do you think it will be transformed as we look to 2021? Say there is herd immunity, say everyone is vaccinated. What will that look like? Will the pent-up demand really be able to help your guys' business and the overall mood and return?
Well, I do think that we will gradually get back to normal in the bar scenes, and knowing the younger crowd that they'll forget about the pandemic quickly. But I'm hoping, I'm telling everyone that I'm hoping it's going to be the Roaring 20s again. So we can get back to normal, and society in general can get back to normal, and we'll forget about the pandemic, and everybody will move on.
Yeah, Pat, I think a lot of us are yearning for that day where you can walk into a bar without ever thinking about distancing. Paul, let me ask you about the PPP, because I know you were able to access those loans early on here. We've got this new stimulus bill the president has now signed that will have additional loans in place. Are you planning to seek out additional loans? How helpful were those initial, was that initial tranche, at least in you being able to keep your staff employed?
The first round of PPP was critical for us to stay open and keep people employed. This second round, now that most of the first round has gone away, is really, really critical, because that'll help us get through the next few months, which are the winter months, and hopefully get us to March and the beginning of April, when I think the vaccinations will all kick in around the country and things will start to loosen up a little bit. So it's absolutely critical that he signed that bill, we get it out and get the money to the businesses before more restaurants close down.
And Pat, I'm looking back here to that interview we did back in May, and I remember I asked you at the time whether closing down one of your 4 restaurants was an option at all, and you were pretty quick to say that that's not at all what we're thinking right now. Has that outlook changed a little now that we are 9 months, 10 months on? How are you looking at 2021 and your ability to sustain the business without a whole lot of bounce back expected until at least the second half of the year?
Well, I think right now the critical factor that's hurting us is the weather. It's just too darn cold outside, and it's going to be cold outside, for the foreseeable future. But I think we've learned how to staff and downsize our operation, that we can get by. We can definitely get by. We've been fortunate with the PPP, and I think we've minimized losses. So we're not in a horrible position, but it can't go on forever, obviously. But we just have to be nimble, and we've had a great staff who has done different jobs, jumped into different situations in all our places, and we've kind of all worked together to get by, and then we'll be okay in a few months.